Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper is piercing that silence with a warning.
One-way tariffs introduced by the U.S. must be reciprocated. Now, will that, friends, be costly in the short run? Yes. But what we can never concede are permanent one-way economic flows from Canada to the United States.
At several events this week, Harper underscored the need for political parties to work together to confront a United States.
The warning did not come from Washington. It did not come from Wall Street, the Pentagon, or a think tank buried in policy papers. It came from Canada, and it came quietly at first. A former Canadian Prime Minister, known for caution rather than drama, stepped forward with a message that immediately unsettled diplomats, business leaders, and allies on both sides of the border. The United States, he said, was no longer a predictable partner, and under Donald Trump, Canada could no longer assume safety in proximity. For decades, the relationship between Canada and the United States was treated as permanent, stable, and immune to political storms. Trade flowed freely. Borders stayed calm. Disputes were managed behind closed doors. But that assumption, according to Stephen Harper, is now dangerous. His warning was not emotional. It was strategic, and it landed at a moment when Canada is being forced to rethink everything it thought it knew about its closest ally. Harper led Canada from 2006 to 2015. He governed during financial crises, wars, and shifting global alliances. He is not known for exaggeration. When he speaks carefully, people listen. That is why his words carried weight when he said Canada must prepare for a future where American policy is no longer anchored in rules, but in leverage. The implication was stark. Canada is no longer dealing with a partner that simply negotiates. It is dealing with a power that threatens. The shift did not happen overnight. It unfolded in stages, often disguised as negotiation. Tariffs were the first signal. Under Trump, economic pressure replaced diplomacy. Canada was hit with steel and aluminum tariffs under the claim of national security. The justification stunned Ottawa. Canada, America's closest military ally, was suddenly framed as a threat. The tariffs were not symbolic. They were designed to extract concessions and send a message. Alignment no longer guaranteed protection. Then came agriculture. Threats against Canadian dairy, lumber, and grain followed. Farmers who had depended on stable cross-border trade for generations found themselves exposed to decisions made in Washington for domestic political gain. What unsettled Canadian leaders most was not the tariffs themselves, but how casually they were imposed. There was no warning, no negotiation phase, no effort to preserve trust. Harper's concern runs deeper than economics. He argues that Trump's approach turns alliances into transactions. In that world, loyalty is temporary, agreements are conditional, and pressure is constant. Canada, long accustomed to quiet cooperation, suddenly finds itself vulnerable not because it did anything wrong, but because proximity makes it an easy target. One of the most alarming aspects of Trump's posture toward Canada is the language. Trump repeatedly framed Canada not as a partner, but as a beneficiary of American generosity. He suggested Canada survives because of the United States. He implied that Canadian prosperity exists at Washington's discretion, that rhetoric matters. In diplomacy, language shapes behavior. When a leader speaks of allies as dependents, policy follows. Harper warned that this mindset erodes the foundation of North American stability. For decades, Canada built its economy around access to the U.S. market. Supply chains, manufacturing, energy, agriculture, and finance were designed on the assumption that political disputes would never endanger the relationship itself. Trump shattered that assumption. Under his leadership, trade became a weapon, not a system. The automotive sector offers a clear example. Canadian auto manufacturing is deeply integrated with the United States. Parts cross the border multiple times before a single vehicle is finished. Trump's threats to impose massive tariffs on Canadian-built vehicles put that entire system at risk. Investment decisions froze. Companies began reconsidering where future models would be built. Jobs were placed in limbo not because of market failure, but because of political uncertainty. Harper sees this as a structural threat, not a temporary disruption. Even if tariffs are lifted, the damage to confidence remains. Businesses plan decades ahead. Once trust is broken, they do not rush back. Canada learned this lesson the hard way. Dependence on a single market, no matter how friendly it once seemed, becomes dangerous when politics turns unpredictable. Energy is another pressure point. Canada supplies vast amounts of oil, gas, and electricity to the United States. Historically, energy trade was treated as mutually beneficial and largely insulated from political fights. Under Trump, that insulation disappeared. Energy policy became entangled with nationalist rhetoric, environmental rollbacks, and aggressive bargaining tactics. Harper warns that Canada cannot assume energy exports will remain safe simply because they always have been. Beyond trade, Harper's warning touches sovereignty itself. Trump openly questioned long-standing norms about borders, alliances, and international law. His comments about NATO allies, his transactional view of security commitments, and his willingness to use economic force against friends sent shockwaves through allied capitals. For Canada, a country that relies on international rules rather than raw power, this shift is deeply unsettling. Harper argues that Canada must adapt to a world where the United States no longer guarantees stability by default. That does not mean hostility. It means preparation. It means diversification. It means reducing exposure where possible and strengthening internal resilience. The days of assuming Washington will always act as a steady partner are over. This message resonates because it is echoed by other Canadian institutions. The Bank of Canada has warned that U.S. protectionism now appears structural rather than cyclical. Trade experts note that even when administrations change, the precedent has been set. Tariffs can be imposed quickly. Agreements can be questioned publicly. Pressure can be applied without warning. Trump's supporters argue that this approach makes America stronger. Harper disagrees. He believes it weakens the very system that allowed North America to thrive. By turning allies into targets, the United States encourages diversification away from itself. Canada has already begun responding. Trade agreements with Europe and Asia are expanding. Domestic infrastructure is being prioritized. New export routes are being developed. These moves are not anti-American. They are defensive. Harper emphasizes that Canada does not seek confrontation. It seeks stability. But stability cannot exist if one partner reserves the right to disrupt the relationship for political gain. In that environment, prudence demands alternatives. One of the most controversial aspects of Trump's posture is how openly he frames economic pressure as dominance. His statements about making Canada comply, about using tariffs to force behavior, about punishing countries that resist, signal a worldview where power matters more than partnership. Harper warns that this worldview forces smaller allies to choose between submission and diversification. Canada is choosing diversification. That choice carries costs. Building new trade routes takes time. Reorienting supply chains is expensive. Competing in new markets requires adjustment. But Harper argues that the cost of inaction is higher. Remaining exposed to unpredictable pressure leaves Canada vulnerable, not just economically, but politically. There is also a psychological shift underway. For generations, Canadians viewed the United States as a benign giant. Differences existed, but trust was assumed. Trump's rhetoric and actions disrupted that perception. Public opinion in Canada shifted sharply during his presidency. Support for reducing dependence on the U.S. market increased. Even traditionally pro-American sectors began advocating caution. Harper's warning is not about panic. It is about realism. He acknowledges that geography cannot change. The United States will always be Canada's neighbor. Cooperation will always be necessary, but cooperation cannot rest on nostalgia. It must be grounded in present reality. That reality includes a United States willing to threaten allies publicly, impose tariffs unilaterally, and frame economic relationships as zero-sum contests. Harper believes ignoring this shift would be irresponsible. Preparing for it is not betrayal. It is survival. Critics accuse Harper of overstating the threat. They argue that Trump's style is bluster, that institutions will constrain excesses, that the relationship will endure. Harper responds by pointing to evidence. Tariffs were imposed, agreements were threatened, language changed, behavior followed. These are not hypotheticals. They already happened. The deeper concern is precedent. Once a leader demonstrates that alliances can be leveraged for domestic politics, future leaders may follow. Even if Trump leaves office, the tool remains available. Harper warns that Canada must plan for a world where unpredictability is no longer an exception. This warning also carries implications beyond Canada. Other U.S. allies are watching closely. If Canada, America's closest neighbor and ally, can be treated this way, no relationship is immune. That realization reshapes global alliances. Countries hedge. Alternatives are explored. Trust erodes quietly. For Canada, the challenge is balancing realism with cooperation. Harper does not advocate confrontation. He advocates preparation, strengthening domestic capacity, expanding trade relationships, investing in resilience, speaking clearly when lines are crossed. Trump's approach, Harper argues, misunderstands leverage. Threats may extract short-term concessions, but they create long-term resistance. Countries adapt, dependence decreases, influence fades. What looks like strength can become isolation. Canada's response so far reflects this lesson. Rather than escalate rhetorically, it has moved strategically. New trade corridors, new partners, new investments, quiet but deliberate steps away from over-reliance. Harper's warning is ultimately about choice. Canada can cling to old assumptions and hope unpredictability fades, or it can accept that the world has changed and act accordingly. He believes the second path is the only responsible one. The message is uncomfortable because it challenges a deeply held belief that Canada's safety lies in closeness to the United States. Harper is not rejecting that closeness. He is redefining it. Partnership must be balanced, not blind. Cooperation must be resilient, not dependent. As Trump continues to dominate American politics, his influence extends beyond any single term. The style, the rhetoric, the willingness to use pressure against allies have already reshaped expectations. Harper's warning is not about one man. It is about a system that has changed. Canada is adjusting, slowly, deliberately, and without drama. But the shift is real, and it began the moment trust was replaced with threats. What happens next will shape North America for decades, and that is why Harper spoke when he did. If you found this analysis valuable, let us know what you think in the comments. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into global power shifts and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next.